And this War of 1812 is really going to turn out to be more of a stalemate than anything else. But there's going to be a battle in New Orleans, which is going to give Americans the vision that they had won the War of 1812, and it gave the British the thought that they weren't going to conquer America, so to speak, like they had talked about before. They really weren't going to be able to teach us this lesson, because sometimes the last victory is the victory that gives you victory, although it may not always be considered a win. But this Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812 was a key battle in keeping our, I wouldn't say freedom from Great Britain, but our strength to compete equally with Great Britain alive. It was very important because it's going to introduce us to a really colorful character in American history, a fellow by the name of Andrew Jackson, who will later become president, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about him. He has an incredible career. Now, by the time that we fought the Battle of New Orleans, the War of 1812 had been going on for nearly 3 years. There was fighting done up in Canada. There was fighting on the East Coast. And now there's fighting going to happen in the southern area of the United States near New Orleans. And the British philosophy was, if we take New Orleans, we'll control the Mississippi River. If we win in Canada, we'll basically split the United States apart and cause some havoc that way. And while this is going on in New Orleans, we are fighting in Canada, and we're doing well in Canada. The British are not winning in Canada, but the Battle of New Orleans is kind of the significant battle, other than the Battle of Baltimore in the War of 1812. And like I mentioned, the British strategy was to capture the port city of New Orleans. They wanted to have access to the Mississippi River. They were going to join forces with what they hoped were victories at Lake Champlain and Lake Erie. And they were going to split the U.S. and control it from both sides, both the Atlantic Ocean side and the Mississippi River side. Unfortunately, they couldn't control the coast when they lost at the Battle of Baltimore or withdrew, and this Battle of New Orleans is going to be another loss for them, including the loss in Canada. Now, the man that was ordered to protect the city of New Orleans was General Andrew Jackson. And he is ordered to bring his Tennessee militia from Tennessee down to New Orleans, where he will be joined by 2,000 regular army to protect the city of New Orleans. So originally the plan for this Battle of New Orleans on the American side is General Andrew Jackson, who's the general of the Tennessee militia, is going to bring his men from Tennessee down to New Orleans. They are going to join force with 2,000 regular trained army soldiers, and they are going to fight off the British who are trying to take this port city. Now, Jackson's militia is going to consist of about 1,000 men. Okay? About 1,000 men. So the original plan was they'd have about 3,000 men in New Orleans fighting off the British there. Okay? It would be Jackson's 1,000 Tennessee militia, along with 2,000 well-trained regular army soldiers. Well, when Jackson and his Tennessee militia got to New Orleans, they were joined by others that wanted to help protect that city. 4 different other groups of people came down, excluding the 2,000 army that were to join him there. So to protect New Orleans, Jackson was joined by, first of all, 2,000 militiamen from Kentucky and Mississippi. So 2,000 men that were members of the Mississippi and Kentucky militia marched to New Orleans to join Jackson. So now, without the regular army, he has how many men?
3,000.
3,000. Okay? Now, he also is joined by 500 men from New Orleans that simply want to help defend their city. So they get 500 men from New Orleans who come to the battle site to join. So now we got 3,500 men, excluding the army. Also joining Jackson's Tennessee militia in New Orleans were approximately 500 free blacks. They had gained their freedom, had moved to New Orleans, and now wanted to help defend their freedom, so to speak, by helping Jackson fight there against the British. So approximately 500 free blacks that had gained their freedom. So now we got 4,000, right? And we also have a small group, believe it or not, of Choctaw Indians that have joined the fight as well. Not a large group. So we're still going to stick with about 4,000 men. Well, what Jackson was really short of in his defense of New Orleans was gunpowder, flints for his muskets, and cannons and cannonballs. Okay, he didn't have hardly any gunpowder. He didn't have many flints for his... What's a flint for a musket? Anybody know what that does, the flint? It makes the spark that sets off the gunpowder. So flints for muskets, and he doesn't have any cannons or cannonballs. And he's a little concerned about that. But again, there are people that believe that protecting New Orleans is important, so Jackson receives these items from a French pirate by the name of Jean Lafitte, who's on your ID sheet. So Jackson also gets support from a French pirate by the name of Jean Lafitte. And he's going to join Jackson at New Orleans as an intelligence officer, but he's the man that's going to supply Jackson with the gunpowder he needs, the flint for his muskets that he needs, and the cannons and cannonballs that he needs. So he's going to get help from 2,000 militiamen from Kentucky and Mississippi. He's going to get help from approximately 500 men from New Orleans. He's going to get help from approximately 500 blacks, free blacks, that gained their freedom to live in New Orleans, and a group of Choctaw Indians. And he's also going to get support from a French pirate by the name of Jean Lafitte, who is going to supply him with men and gunpowder and flints and cannons and cannonballs. Ironically, the 2,000 regular army men that he was supposed to get never showed up. So this is what he has to fight against the British at New Orleans. So the 2,000 regular army soldiers that were to meet him in New Orleans never showed up. So how many men does he have approximately? 4,000. And he's going to face a British military of over 10,000. So with just over 4,000 men, General Jackson is going to be vastly outnumbered, more than 2 to 1, as nearly 10,000 British soldiers are going to be on the attack of New Orleans. And these British soldiers are going to be under the command of Major General Sir Edward Pakenham, who's on your ID sheet. Sir Edward Pakenham is going to be the man that leads these 10,000 British soldiers against Jackson and his 4,000 men. Sir Edward Pakenham will be the Major General in command of the British. Now you might take that map out I gave you so you kind of understand what we're talking about here. Okay? I used color ink on that, so by God I committed myself, so get it out in front of you. Okay? I'll kind of explain what happens here. Now on December 23rd of 1814, on December 23rd of 1814, the British come ashore south of New Orleans and they camp on sugar plantations. Okay? On December 23rd of 1814, the British come ashore south of New Orleans and they camp on sugar plantations. You kind of see by the British flags where they're located on the map. Now Jackson every night went on the offensive, and he ordered his men to fight the British forces. Why was that unusual? Yeah, it's at night. You don't fight at night. That violates the rules of war. So Jackson takes the offensive, and during the night he orders his men to fight the British forces. And this was a real foreign concept for the British soldiers because the rules of war prohibited fighting unless it was light. And what would happen basically is General Jackson's men would attack the British camps at night, and they would fire cannons into the British camp from a ship that was docked in the Mississippi River. So they're violating all the rules of war. They're going in there and basically harassing and fighting these British soldiers at night, hand-to-hand combat, along with firing cannons into the camps from a ship docked in the Mississippi River. Now it just so happened this time of year there was no moon. So when they went to attack these guys at night, it was very dark. It was very, very dark. And Jackson did this on purpose. He's got a strategy. What type of tactics do they call these sneak attack? Guerrilla, not gorilla, but guerrilla tactics, which means that Jackson's men were fighting these British at night by rifle. They were hitting them with rifle butts. They had swords, knives, fists, pistols, even strangling hands. So this was really guerrilla warfare at its best. They weren't following any rules of war. They were attacking at night. They were fighting with rifle fire, pistol fire, using the butts of the rifles to inflict damage. They were using swords, knives, fists, and even strangling hands. Now, this is where it's going to start to make sense if you look at your map. During the night, he was disrupting the British with these attacks. And during the day, what were his men doing? What? They were building a wall fortification called a parapet. It's a wall of earth and wood. And you can see on the map right where they were building the wall, right on that particular yellow line. I should have put an arrow there. So during the night they were keeping the British off balance. And what were the British doing during the day then? Recovering, very good, from these surprise attacks. And Jackson was having his men during the day build this parapet, or this wall fortification made out of earth and wood. And this fortification is going to be located 1 mile north of the British camp. It's going to be between the British camp and what? New Orleans. Very good, Julie, which they're protecting. So this big wall made of earth and wood is going to be dug 1 mile north of the British camp, between the British camp and New Orleans. Now if you look on this map, how has he protected his flanks? What are the two things that are protecting his flanks?
The Mississippi River and the swamp.
The Mississippi River and the swamp. Very good, right? He's got his flanks protected. The only way the British Army marches toward him is how? Straight ahead. Okay, they can't go either flank because there's swampland and the river. So he does a very good job here. So this fortification is going to be positioned so Jackson's men can protect their right and left flanks with a river on their right and a swamp on their left. Now in addition, what do you see yellow there? What is that? What's right in front of that yellow? Can you tell? A trench, which they dug 10 feet deep and 10 feet wide. And how'd they fill that with water? They used the river. So they're even going to make it harder to get to them because they're going to dig this big trench right in front of the parapet. So when the British come, they've got to cross into water that's deep. Okay? So it was 10 feet wide and approximately 10 feet deep, but I wouldn't guarantee it was that deep all the way around. So in front of the wall, Jackson ordered his men to dig a moat, was what they called it, 10 feet wide, which they filled with water from the river. So for 4 days and 4 nights, this attacking and building goes on. 4 days and 4 nights. And finally the British get tired of it, and what do they decide to do? Attack. Okay? So for 4 days and 4 nights, they continue this night attack in the building of this fortification or parapet. And finally the British decide to attack the American fortification. Now this is kind of interesting because the British are mad at Jackson for what? These night assaults. And they actually send him a note and tell him how ungentlemanly he is for attacking at night and violating these rules. He actually has a note sent to him by the British leader who says how ungentlemanly he is for breaking the rules of war.
Didn't the British attack at night though in Baltimore? They still attacked at night?
Yeah, but it was a little bit different because it wasn't ground troop fighting, you know what I mean? But you're right. Okay? Now, what does Jackson do when he gets that note? He responds and he informs the British how ungentlemanly they are to think that they could occupy American soil and they ought to just go right back to where they came from. That's kind of the answer you'd get from Andrew Jackson. He responds to his note by sending a note saying how ungentlemanly they are to think that they can occupy American soil, and he urges them to go back where they came from. Well, that irritates them, and so they make the decision to attack. Which will take us to our next subtopic, which is American victory at New Orleans. American victory at New Orleans. Now, General Jackson's forces in New Orleans are going to endure 3 separate assaults of that fortification. The British are going to hit that fortification 3 separate times, and we're going to break down each assault so you understand it. So we'll talk about the first assault by the British against Jackson's fortification. And that occurs on December 28th of 1814. December 28th of 1814.
Is that like Christmas?
Not really.
I thought they weren't supposed to fight during winter.
That's like World War I.
Well, no. That was a rule too, but this is in the South, so is there snow in the winter? Not so much, so they don't pay attention to that. So on December 28th of 1814, British Commander Pakenham first orders the firing of Congreve rockets into the sky toward Jackson's fortification. So the first thing the British do during the first assault is British Commander Sir Edward Pakenham orders the firing of Congreve rockets into the sky. Why did he do that?
Scare them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Most of those men had never seen a Congreve rocket before, and so he hoped to frighten them into surrender. So Pakenham believed these firework rockets would frighten General Jackson and his men, and they'd retreat because they had never seen one before. Now actually the American reaction, according to documentation about this, is the men in Jackson's brigade thought they, quote, looked rather pretty. And his men obviously stood fast at the fortification. That didn't work. Okay? So once the Congreve rockets were shot off, and Jackson and his men stood their ground, the first assault, basically the British fired their cannons from a distance into the American fortification, and they fired muskets into the fortification, but not very close. They were at a distance. So they're firing their muskets and cannons into the fortification.
You mean the wall?
Yeah. 3 hours worth of bombardment by both cannon fire and musket fire from a distance. Okay? Well, to be quite frank with you, did that work? No. And so Pakenham withdraws, and he decides he needs a second strategy, which will be the second assault. So the first assault starts on December 28, 1814, when Sir Edward Pakenham fires Congreve rockets into the fortification, hoping to frighten Jackson and his men into retreat because they had never seen Congreve rockets before. According to history, Jackson's men believed that these rockets looked rather pretty and steadfast. Once Pakenham realized that they weren't going to retreat, he then fired cannons into the fortification of the parapet and musket fire from a distance. To no avail, first assault doesn't work. Second assault, British commander Pakenham is really reluctant to march his men directly into the American fortification because why? What's it going to result in?
Mass loss.
A lot of casualties, okay? He knows what they've set up there. Okay, he's aware of the moat in front. And he's really apprehensive to march his men directly into the American fortification because he knows it would result in heavy casualties. So on January 1st of 1815, he brings in bigger cannons from the British Navy ships and hopes to fire upon the fortification wall to destroy it and get him to retreat. So he goes and gets some bigger cannons from the Navy. And he's going to fire upon the fortification again, hoping to destroy the wall. So he waits for a fog to lift that morning, and he begins his bombardment of the American parapet or fortification. And Jackson responds with what? Cannon fire of his own. So Jackson's going to respond with cannon fire of his own. So you got a cannon fight here, basically. Now the key to this